So there's, if you've opened up the file or saw that GIF that I exported or open up the export, or if I just hit 0 to play this, we can see, just kind of the setup, this kind of basic animation. And there's a couple of different, you had to include a star wipe at the end. Everybody loves a good star wipe. So um, I think there's a couple of different techniques, and these can kind of build on themselves to lead to more complex ones. So if I just kind of look through them, you can, I mean, this is a good way to kind of learn, is just to dissect old projects, go back and just try and figure out how they did things. And there's actually motion design sites out there that, for very complex sites, that share the projects so that you can do exactly that and dig in. But if you select all of the layers by hitting Control A, you hit U, it might be UU, hit it twice. It'll show you all the different keyframes in here. You can start to see what's going on with some of these. So, like this circle here is actually a shape layer, which is something you can create within uh, After Effects. And with that, if you twirl it down, it gives you some controls over, it's actually an ellipse. And it gives you parameters here for the actual size of it. So if I were to take this and scrub this, this is something you can keyframe, just the size of that. So that's one way to do that. You could also do it with just a scale. That's another way. If you didn't want to convert that, it actually came in. If I turn that off, so this part, this was the original vector circle that was part of the design. So I just kind of recreated a circle in there, moved it to that position, and animated that instead. You could have easily done the same exact thing just by scaling this, and it's, I didn't quite import it correctly, so it's a little bit odd. But for to make sure that you would have had to get that in the right place, you just have to expand the artboard on your Illustrator file or import it so that it doesn't, or move it to the center of the artboard and then reposition it once it's in After Effects. Some of the other things that um, this, I believe, is if you select a file, a layer in the viewer and hit X, it'll kind of navigate to it here. Lots of quick keystrokes are useful when you're working this. So this is just position and opacity. I just have, it's here, and you can see only the X values even moving. So if I scrub that, we could have moved this to over here, and then it comes in from this side if you want to do that. You could, instead, you could, there is a guide. You can also just kind of create your own or set them here under Edit. Preferences is down here, and then Keyboard Shortcuts is here. It's kind of a lot to look at, but the ones I use most are on these layers. The number keys up top, you can type in the number of the layer. So if I type 1 using not the number pad, actually, wait, no, I'm sorry, it is the number pad that you need to use. If I type that, you can just go to that number. So if 11, you just type it in, and it would go right there. And so you can navigate that way. I use those a lot. And then P is position, S is scale, and R is rotation, T is opacity. So those reveal those. I use those a ton too. You can also hold shift for those. So if I hold shift now and put P, it'll show me both of them. So a lot of times I just kind of do that. It's the same as sort of, and once you have a keyframe, I often just hit UU to twirl it down. You can also use this search function too if you need to filter it out more. Okay. So on these ones, I believe I was using same deal here, just position. But another way you might use these or animate these, I'll just duplicate one of these just to kind of show the idea. I'll remove the position. And a lot of, actually, you know what? I think I'm using that down on the bottom here. We can see this line at the bottom.
Hey, Kevin, I do have a question.
Yeah,
So for me, I think one of my biggest challenges is always finding a visually stimulating way to have text come in on screen without having to go through keyframing it from lower to up and then fading it in. Like I do you have any recommendations on quick ways to have text look nice versus it just fading in and fading out?
yeah, it's kind of like that could almost be a class unto itself. I feel
Okay.
like it there are a lot of ways and it depends. This one here you can see like I'm just kind of doing a little bit of a if I go to that, I'm doing a little bit of a position on it and a little bit of opacity too. There is something on text called a text animator. Um, so I could show that quickly. And I'm going to remove these keyframes. So there's nothing on here anymore. This is just, there's an endpoint still, so it's popping on when you get to that point in the timeline. But if you twirl this down, you can come to animate. And then there's those same parameters here. So if I was to use, say, position, this kind of works like a field, I guess, is a way to describe it. So if I do put my position down, you can now animate the range. And so that's kind of, you would do something like that to maybe bring it in. So yeah, now it's off screen. You animate the begin, the in to out on that, and then you can kind of get that. So you would keyframe that same thing. If I go to the endpoint, just I is another quick key that I often use. So I'll just page down and shift is also just to kind of skip forward. So it goes by 10. So I often just work in increments of 10. And then if we do that, just kind of shorten that, you kind of have that. And then here's something that's interesting. If you wanted now to not have it move from the bottom, instead of doing that, you could put in this and it changes the parameter of what that field is. So it's kind of it's going to cycle through the percentage of whatever your text is. And now it's
Is it
doing
is
that
it going to
instead.
be the same thing even if I have it coming from a mask too?
Yeah, I mean, if you could still just kind of mask this, I mean, it's not if you were to draw a mask on this layer, that I would not recommend that being the way to do it. You'd have to create a separate like layer to be as a matte layer, which actually I think I show down here. So this text that's coming out is just a position, but it's using this layer above, which they changed this so it's a little bit harder for me to show you. But if you drag this column out, you have this track matte column. And I just made a square with this tool, which is the same one that you use for the circle. If you hold this down, you have these different shapes. There's like a rectangle, ellipse, star tool. So I just drew a square here. I have to delete that because I already made this one. And I've just positioned it under on the edge of that globe. And as soon as I'll undo this, no map. As soon as I link this to that, it turns that off. Here, if I do that again, you might see more what's going on. So that was my matte layer. And this is where I would definitely, naming your layers starts to really help. I use a lot of prefixes for stuff. So if it's a matte, I'll just put matte URL. And then as soon as you can kind of see it's gonna just dip out from that matte. So if I were to move this over and just shift that, and this might be another way that you can kind of get some more complex animation, Rico. Like you start to combine a few of these. Like you might have WWW come out of one mat and then split up your text and have the like next piece come out behind it and then come out behind that. It can be cool, but I mean, there's no easy way around it. You still have to kind of separate everything into and really and yeah, onion layer it out. Yeah, so here's an example where I was using parenting. I think we talked about that in the first one. So I don't actually, this is coming in, but I don't have any position keyframe on that. It's just linked to number 13, which has a position, scale, and rotation on it. So I'll remove that so you can just see what's going on with it. It's just, kind of linked to it. It won't pick up, parenting doesn't pick up opacity. So if I change that, you can still see that part. That's where things might get a little bit tricky if you need to fade on. And that's where you would maybe do something like pre-comp it so that you have one item to fade out all as one unit. But otherwise, you can kind of just add these other little things right inside of it. And I mean, that can, since you have the simple motion there, you might combine this with, in the rotation, this is the amount of revolution. So there's an angle, but you can also put an amount there. So now, it really spins. I'm not saying that's a tasteful animation, but um, yeah. I'm curious, is anybody following along and having an easy time or trouble with anything? Any other questions? Okay. Can't actually see the chat, so let's see. I think on this bottom layer was another technique that I use sometimes, and I was going to talk about it here on this that could have worked, where it's a non-uniform scale basically. So instead of I just want a lot of this is just revealing it onto the page, and then sequencing it out into an order. So on this one, I'm just using a horizontal scale only. So if normally it would be linked. And so if you do that, it kind of gets, skinny in the vertical also. So for some stuff like this, I will take it and unlink it and just scale the horizontal. And you could do that with something like this too. And it kind of brings in like an idea of animation where I think the second level of you just bringing things in is then having like, see this dot here, like it comes in and it kind of then drifts a little bit so that you have a little bit of like background movement still going on. I think the circle was doing the same thing where it kind of gets to 90% of its size really fast. And then the rest of the video, it's just growing between like 90 and 100. So I, that kind of adds some life to it. And you could do the same thing here, even if it's positioned in, just kind of extend that over the life And if you now take that and just copy and paste this to all the other ones, you kind of get this extra movement now that throughout. Let's see. So
So,
showed masking. Sorry, was there some?
yep, quick question. So for for the sake of having an intriguing background, would it be safe to say that I could have this circle do a slow creep and then like slowly get bigger and then slowly get smaller as we have this text on screen? Like, is that a way, where we could just add some more flair to it too?
Definitely, because and that's a good, yeah, good thought. Because if you just keep it creeping, and it's really long scene, like by the end, it's just overtaking something. So yeah, maybe like a pulsing, and then just returning back to. And an easy way to do this even would be, um, you can just kind of. Where am I stripping that? Or I deleted it altogether. But I'll just go to my beginning one. So I'll show how I even created that. I select ellipse, and usually if you double click it, it'll just fit it to the frame. And since we're in a square frame, it'll make a perfect circle. So I'll just double click that. But I don't want to have anything selected or it'll make a mask. So now I've got my circle.
One last question for you. So as far as the final design, do you sort of like add all of the still elements together and build that out first and then you animate?
Yeah, yeah, we can. Yeah, and that's why I kind of wanted to have just walk through the ending, but we can kind of walk back through the beginning if we want to sort of follow along and see how I do. There's no wrong way, but I think there's quicker, more efficient ways. So, like, here's something. Here's your thing that you're talking about. You could easily just take these, go back down the here, and just keep on like copying and pasting. And if you have a lot, you might even grab them all again, and now you just kind of have this thing that's pulsing, and you can just position that to where over here, let's say. So that might be something that now you just stick behind, or you make it the same color as your circle. You just use your picker. Yeah, move that one, and now you've got like kind of a pulsing thing. If you want, you can select those and just move them around. If you're not sure if it's kind of look at the graph to get an idea if it's similar speed, but um, yeah, I'm gonna go back and kind of show like what you were saying. The easiest way, and I think yeah, for especially if you're starting, is to kind of start with a still, layout, and that's what I was saying. The first, for maybe social media and stuff, it's kind of trying to figure out what needs to maybe reveal, what's already just drifting. Sometimes you don't need to reveal everything. That was kind of the standard way, and um,
Yeah,
here
for
it's
for
going from totally nothing on, but you might have like some of these elements just there and then just the headline come on, or maybe it's like, there's stuff too where I wasn't quite wanting to, I wasn't sure if we should get into this yet, but there's like effects that you could add on to. So to maybe just create like a highlight or something like that to give it like a glint. Um, so yeah, I think here's something that um, let's see. So I recreated the circle. Nothing's animated on there. I just my first step is usually to be kind of like, okay, what do I want to recreate live, and what can I just keep as a vector? It's an extra work to make something live, but there's a benefit to it. Like this text, it doesn't have to be live, but you saw what happens if it is, we can get that animation control and do a little bit more with it. So there's some things that, and there's different ways to do it, but sometimes it's just not worth it. Sometimes it's easier to kind of see it and just be like, oh, I can easily recreate this. Like some of these maybe um, are not actually hard to make. There's a lot of parameters. There's a lot of really actually useful design tools in here, so in the shape layers. So if I don't have anything selected, and I just double click this, I'll have this rectangle. And just like the circle, you have parameters on here, and you can unlink that. And instead of scale, this is just like the size of your square. And you also have stuff like roundness, which is just the greatest. Like instead of changing to like points or anything. So now something like this green bar, anything, or even these, I think of these as maybe, really skinny bars that I can just animate like that. And I think if we look at the end one on this one, I did that. Um, yeah, I think I did. And the thing that's interesting with this square, when you round it enough and you make it the same size, so I'll make it so we can see it a little bit bigger. If I make it 200 by 200, this is a rectangle with a ton of rounding. It looks like a circle. So you can kind of start to get that shape, transition with something like this. So you would maybe, in that example, I have it scaling down from, so I'll take it, I know I want to end up, this is kind of an intermediate point. So I'll move this here. Then maybe we'll make it small. We'll make it just grow from there. And then from here, I, I know from experience to put a little pause in, but then I can go and expand this. And so you kind of have like a two-step animation a little bit. This is really slow. I didn't realize I was working on 30 seconds. So that's something to be aware of. Um, so that's 20 frames. That's about a second. That's pretty close. I can also grab all these, and if I hold Alt, uh, and whichever one I grab, I can kind of condense them. So it's like a time squish. So that's what I was doing on this one down here. But I think I went a step further where you actually kind of use this animation technique called overshoot. So you animate it a little bit beyond, it gives it like kind of a rubbery. So I'm having it come bigger than it's ending up. And it's with a little bit more timing and finesse, it can look as bouncy as you need it to, or as stiff. And that's really where like the kind of character and the real craft of the real high end animation, they will spend, hours tweaking just these like 20 frames. So if your stuff isn't quite living up to what you had in your head, just know that you probably just don't have enough time.
Hey Kevin, so I've noticed inside this timeline that there are a lot of Illustrator files that you are manipulating. Is that a common practice? Because I've seen it more since I've been working here because the designers give me what the final still looks like, and then I just import and do the animations based off of what they have. But as far as creating something from scratch, would that normally just all be done in After Effects, or is it
Definitely
good to
could. I mean, if
do?
you knew you wanted to create this, you could easily, let's say, I'm just gonna, oops. So yeah, this was the Illustrator file. I got it from just Adobe stock, and it was probably flat, actually. I think I changed some of the text. So a lot of times what you could do, like if you wanted the live text from here, it's live here. So I'll just copy and then hit Control T to get the text tool and just type it in here. And now you've got it live here. You might need to reposition. And I think I've showed this trick before, but this is where I use the difference mode. It's never know, like there's never any use for it except for this. It helps you just line it up. Once it's all black, you can kind of see the difference. So now you've got that live, and there. I showed you that text. It gets a little bit more complicated, but there's actually like uh, inside of these effects is a whole there's a place where you can see them all better, I think. But there's presets, including text presets. There's like some of them are just things that, I mean, most of them are useless. They're really pretty bizarre. But um, can again is kind of that dissection thing. If you're really curious about text animators, it can be you kind of just drag that on here, and all of a sudden it gives you like a decoder effect. And the way it's doing that is um, there's a character offset parameter under that text animator that you can also animate. So it just goes through the range and changes. There's some code in there too, I think. But yeah, character offset and animation is just going through. So if you want it to be offset more, do that and it'll go like a little bit faster. If you only wanted it to be maybe 2, and that's like how many letters it's changed. You can see like it's ending up at A. So when we're seeing it, it's C, B, A. But I don't use a lot of these. What I do is I use there's a different shape in here. So if you add something, there's this range selector in more advanced settings. And there's ways to use like the percentage, there's ways to use you could use index, so that would basically count the amount of characters. So you might use it like always to do half of it or something, but it gets really complex. But one that I often do just to make it a little bit smoother, because if you start to animate, let's say I just put and you can add parameters. So I'm already doing position, so you could see that's doing that. But I can also add a property like opacity, and if that will show up there, and now it'll also fade it out when I do it. Um, it there's a different shape here, so you can do these different ones where round would kind of like bring it out and in, and this is one of those things where you almost get like just a highlight effect. It's maybe not a reveal. So that's what a lot of these are, where it's animate in or animate out. But then also these ones are more of like some of those other wild, weird things. There used to be a viewer, a way to look at them and like kind of browse presets under animation. It looks like it might pop up in Bridge. So yeah, I think if you select some of these And there's some of these are for like vector layers or other text too. There's a lot of just utility stuff. Um, but if I just double click, you can see that's a typewriter one. Wipe into center, twirl on, stretching, spinning. This is normally the kind of thing that I would animate. Yeah, this is I would probably use something like this. That one's pretty not bad. And so that's interesting. So this is something that I do. Like let's say I'm going to apply this character one. I'll just double click that, and I think it did it. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think I have my old one in there still. So you can stack these also. Okay. Under advanced also, where we had percentage, we also have characters. You can also select stuff like, so this would just do it word by word instead. And this is something I do a lot where I will keep the same type of animation, but for like maybe a main headline, use it letter by letter. And then for the sub headline, use word by word. And then maybe for text like this, I would maybe use actually line by line. So if I just copy this now, I could actually come back into get rid of some of these things that I'm doing. I already made this live here, so I'm gonna. Well, I'll show you how I did that. Yeah, you can do that. Although it acts a little bit weird because it's easing the range, not the amount. So it gets a little bit. Let's see. What are we doing on time? 35. All right. Okay, so I'm going to copy that text and I'll just. And we'll just focus on the body text now. So I'll get rid of that. And then I'm just going to use my text tool. I already copied and pasted, so I get it right back in here. It's all the same size and everything. If you needed to control it, you have a character palette and all of this. Um, so here, now if I went back in, I think I hit the text. Let's just say this is where I would use the line by line one. Anyway, I don't know what that was. So many layers. So I'll just say animate in. I know that was slide up by character. So I can even just kind of pull it into the viewer, drop it right on there. And it'll put the keyframes where not where the endpoint is, but wherever your time marker is. So if I hit UU on this, you'll see that it does it there and it sets it for what there's like a some kind of default somewhere. So this is kind of weird, like character by character. It's like not really that appealing. So this is where we would use that same shape thing. And even word by word is kind of a lot of movement if you're trying to really read this, especially in a short amount of time. But like it becomes kind of nice if you do it line by line. So that's how that's almost always how I treat text. I rarely bring in text. It's almost easy, always easier to just copy and paste it. The only time I don't is if it's like maybe logo text. If it's really, it can be, you have kerning and letting, capabilities, but it doesn't always copy over exactly. And once you start to animate, it can get a little bit odd. So sometimes it might be make sense. And in that case, you might use one of these other type of presets. There's like wipes and things like that. So if I didn't, let's turn back on the vector text. You still wanted to do something like this. There's all these different transitions in here. And these are, I think I showed some of these before, like Venetian. Well, that might not be good. Sure. Well, just linear wipe. If I drag that right onto this, I'm not actually sure which text. So that's why I like to have the name here. And you can see that it's already got the white transition built in. And this has an angle, so it's got like a completion where it just goes from 0 to 100, but you could change the angle. So maybe you want to just do something like that. Um, you could also feather it out if you didn't want it to be so harsh. And a lot of times, what I would do for something like this, maybe if I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting, would maybe be stack a couple of these and fill the first one or the bottom layers with another color. So you could use fill, this under generate, or just make another layer. And now you kind of get that like trickle down. You might want to fade it out at the end if it's like a little bit too much. And that's also where the pre-comping thing kind of comes in, because if you do this animation on like a pre-comp and then fill it, you can just start to stack things up really quickly and make things really cool. You could also then have color control so that it's not bright red, but it matches your brand or whatever else you need it to be. This can also be a cool thing after, maybe after it's up, just as like a highlight, kind of like we were talking about after it's revealed. Let's see. This is I got through a lot of what I was planning to talk about. Um I'll show you one more thing. Like if I was gonna, this one, it was something that I kind of had just sort of, these little elements are, I guess, the next kind of level where the tiny little filigree is almost what makes the most difference in the motion. Because the bigger elements, if you kind of think of them as like having some mass, they might move a little bit slower. They're gonna not. You really want your eye to read that. So it's actually like the twinkly stuff behind it that might. So maybe some different ways that we want to do treat this would be to, if I use this, there's a cool tool in here. Like I said, I'm gonna make a new comp. I just hit Control N. Doesn't really matter what the size is, but so if we make, you can also just draw a circle on here if you want. If you hold Shift, it'll be, constrain its proportions. If you hold Alt, it'll go from the center. Control Alt and Shift, it'll go from the center. But you could see that when you do this, the anchor point is not centered. So that's why I like to sometimes just make an ellipse. Even if it were not square, it's still just easier sometimes to come in and then type it in. I'll just say 500 by 500. Okay, so we've got a small circle here now, and we're trying to make that dot pattern. Well, in these shape layers is something powerful called a repeater. And it's kind of like that text effect where you can start to um, create interesting patterns. So it comes as a default and it ships those over. I'm gonna make these a little bit smaller so you can see more. Oops. So you could say put in more copies of this. Then you could put in another repeater. So it'll take that row and then instead of going across, you want it to come down. And so we've got our little grid here, and I can bring that in and scale it down. And we've kind of recreated that element now. And you might need to change it up a little bit, but how it looks. But there's some interesting controls that you can animate in the repeater too. Like you can animate the offset here. You can animate the start and end opacity. So that it kind of has maybe like a little bit of a wipe. If you did that also in this one, you get like kind of a a double sort of interesting effect. And using the design tools inside After Effects are kind of the easiest way to animate things. Otherwise, you're sort of limited to maybe those position, scale, rotational kinds of things. And um, there's just a little bit more interest that you can do here, especially when you start to add like rotations and things like that. So now, like, if you were to start to, maybe animate this kind of thing and you animate it across here, if it was big, that might even be like your background, like a wave or something that might be part like a footer in like a PowerPoint presentation or something. And that on top of, or just as a like a little textural thing can be really cool. So it's just playing around with that, even scaling some of this maybe, like looking at the size of it, and there's kind of endless possibilities really. Um, as, but it can also like you kind of have to keep track of where you are. You can see where all of a sudden things just disappear too. So that's how, maybe you're thinking is finding these elements and thinking, how might I approach that? I want to go back to this actually. It's like how I was saying that this was one way to do. You have these lines, you could kind of create these as real, skinny, wide squares. But is it same as an Illustrator or something? You could also just make this a stroke. So I don't know if it's my screen blocking that, but you have fill and stroke with a pen tool up here. So and it acts just like the shape layers. If something is selected, like a layer is selected, and I use this, I'm going to draw a mask on that layer. So you'll see that is, now cropped out and it's got its own little thing under there. If I don't have anything selected and I just don't close the shape, well, I could have easily up here, I can kind of change it after. Oops. Okay. I want no fill. You could also fill it with a gradient. You could fill it with a radial gradient. Those are kind of your different fill options. You actually have the same options in stroke. I'm just going to pick stroke color for solid for now. And then if we pick our same green, All right, so we're getting close with that. And then what we want here is all we need to do is just like an Illustrator, we can change the end caps to be a round cap. So if you go into stroke, we have our caps down here, butt cap. If we go to round cap, now we've got the same thing, and we can control either you can have the path itself, so you can get beyond that shape. But then really the power with strokes is that it's another kind of built-in tool here. I'm gonna solo this. If you go to add, which is kind of like we did with the text, you have some other things here. We've got the repeater again. So if you wanted, this is kind of cool. Real easy way to make like a ton of those lines. And again, you can animate all those if you want. So that could have been a way that we just animated those white lines here. Um, Another thing though that's under there, there's some other effects, but one of them is called trim paths, and this is probably the most like commonly used thing in all the After Effects. This will trim the stroke. So you have the same deal as before, your range start to zero, start and end. If you animate this, it just draws it on. So if I want to have that same thing scale out, I'll just go on there. And now I've got my line drawing on. I could also animate it off just by doing that. If I offset this, oops, if I or overlap them, I should say. You get like just kind of like a moving dash a little bit more. So that's something you might do too, and something I do a lot actually, where maybe I don't have it go all the way off. Maybe I would actually stop it there. So like this green piece here, like this green thing, sometimes it's just thinking of how you might want to do it. So I could take this stroke, select this color. I'm going to draw, just put a pen point there, hold shift. And you could easily copy and paste that same um, trim paths if you wanted. So once I do one, I often just copy and paste that throughout and then later go on and do the timing. So here we'll do, there's kind of our endpoint, I guess. So maybe we'll animate. This is where you kind of have to maybe think actually I need to sort of animate here first. And it's even after all this time, I still have to kind of play around to get to where I want it to be. And then we'll animate that there. And I'll tweak the look to be after I get it, the movement figured out, because to me that's the hardest part. So here I'll use my little difference trick again. Make that a little bit bigger so I can make sure it's right there. Twirl that up and down to get to this round cap. And it looks like I need to maybe tweak like this. But that's pretty darn close. Maybe not perfect. So I can now select the path and just position those into place. If I turn it back to normal mode, instead of that scaling thing, we've got this sort of thing. It's like a totally different. I mean, that'll draw your eye a lot more. So it's a lot of, what's your hierarchy in your design and what do you really want people to look at? But especially if you're looking up here and there's a lot going on, the further I've gotten in design, I've started to use or motion. It's like I start to use it more purposefully, like this, to really like catch your eye and try to help the message, not just do fancy eye candy stuff, which you can also do. You can. So I mean, like for example, like a way that I would use like this repeater a lot is with that same technique, maybe repeat it but with rotation. So you can make like a star, and in time, if you have the trim paths repeated around a star, you just get this kind of like little burst effect that you can drop in wherever and drop it in 100 times, and just put them all over the place. And all of a sudden, it's like, or if you mask the bottom of it, all of a sudden it looks like that could be rain hitting water and like splashing or something. And there's a lot of ways to start to kind of fake uh, simulations that you might have already been doing or might need to do, especially for artwork. Um, let's see. Is there anything else in this? Just check in. Anybody have any questions or anything? Does anybody